thank you so much. She's really good, right? Let's give her another. She was telling us last night about the shows she has coming up in the Pike, and they're really astonishingly good. And, you know, big museums, small museums, galleries, university galleries, you're right up there at the top, so bravo. And thank you all for coming. You've all been so bright, and I mean, the classes I talk to, that can be kind of, you know, exhausting if, you know, people are like, I don't want to be here. And you all made me feel, you know, like you were interested, and you had such good questions and responses, and, you know, it's just great to be here. So thank you for coming. And you can hear me okay? Okay, and you know, this is such a weird space. Feel free to make it a conversation if there's anything that, you know, you want to say or ask or whatever. I can talk fast and do this in under an hour, in which case, you know, you guys can leave or we can have a few questions. But you have to bear with me for talking fast. It doesn't mean that you can't interrupt, okay? Because I'm going to try to go through a lot of work. And I'll give you a lot of work. Let me make sure I know how to work this. Just that way. And, okay, good. So I'm starting with this one because it's indicative of my last show that was at PPOW in New York, and that was kind of a culmination of really a lifetime of being a feminist, I want to be activist. I mean, you know, I march and when I can, and I do what I can, but where it's time, I felt like it was time to turn the tables and honor women. And this was before the Me Too movement, but it was in great kind of coincidence. The great women that have formed me and changed our history. I called it Huntergatherer, referring to maybe the need to kind of rethink what we think of as civilization. In terms of, so that's the overarching idea. In terms of just how I go about painting, I talked to the classes before about, I don't make preliminary sketches. The painting kind of evolves as it goes, and I'm going to talk about that process. But I'm showing you this one because it's an example of you know, a finished painting that I put in a show and several shows. But I got it back, and right now the new version of this has a big chandelier, like, you know, crashing on her head. So that's kind of so this is another example. So she didn't have a bouffant about 2 weeks ago, but there was something I felt like, you know, she needed to have her head be bigger to kind of describe the wealth of ideas that I wanted this figure to embody in terms of the idea of honoring women and honoring imagination as the scrolls festoon around her. And I'm going to talk about this more later, but I am the product of a lifetime of image consumption, taking in powerful images, disturbing images, wrestling with them, arguing with them, and I've come up with, over time, a sense of those images that nourish us and those images that deplete us. And so realizing that I wanted to, in a sense, show the images that I have stored in my brain as a kind of festoonery around her, almost her raiment. So what you're seeing here is on the top edge are great paintings that work on us. Sometimes they work on us in provocative ways, sometimes negatively and sometimes incredibly positively. The whole history, what you're seeing in that very top scroll, is dealing with the manifest destiny and the kind of the history of grand paintings, and I'm going to talk about that later. But the flip side is the images from the media that sort of tell the truth to the lying that went on in certain periods of art making. For instance, in the French Academy, there was a lot of propagandizing for Napoleon. So my work is a kind of coming to grips with all these images that have worked on me. So now I'm going to just show you a couple more. And then here we have the one painting that was the kind of capstone to the Water Rises show that was bought by LSU Museum of Art, that so couldn't be included. But it's the first painting I did when I decided to really wrestle with this idea of climate change and how we are going to deal with this new world. I called it Camp Bedlam. Little pun there. It's a very big painting. It's a diptych. As I was saying to the class before, and those of you who came to those lectures before, there'll be some repeating, so I apologize. But these paintings start off as rants because I'm very upset about what's happening with our world. I remember after Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, and then reading the Elizabeth Kolbert 3-part article about climate change called The Climate of Man that really blew my mind way back in 2004, I think it was 2003 maybe. I realized that we're on the brink of something. And it's not only life-changing, but epoch-changing. There's been a lot of talk about the need to change the name of our epoch. Some people call it the Anthropocene, because it's geology changed so radically by human action. Some people are calling it the Plantationocene, because plantations and a particular approach to husbanding the land that has made such a huge difference, calamitous. But in any case, we're living in a huge time, and may we be so lucky as to live in such strange and interesting times, and may we rise to the occasion in any way we can. And I decided that the one thing that I can do is paint. I'm not a politician, I can't go proselytizing, but I can paint. And so again, these might have started as a rant, but they ended as a building of a world that was a way of imagining my way into changed circumstances, how we might repurpose, the soggy mattresses that were all over the sidewalks of Baton Rouge after the last big rainstorm, and there's a huge hurricane coming into Florida now. On and on, but we will have to be creative is the point. But to go back in time, I just wanted to tell you about where I come from, born in Peoria, this kind of family. I can always tell how old people are, whether they respond to this. Who knows who this is? Go ahead, tell us. Ozzie and Harriet. Ozzie and Harriet. Yeah, I always mix them up too. But yeah, this was kind of my family, except, add 3 more kids, Catholic family, born in Peoria, very, very Catholic, very conservative. This is the kind of house I grew up in. We moved from Peoria to Novato, and then from Novato to horrible Hayward. When I was about 9, moved to Novato when I was 4. And, I knew even as a little kid that there was something wrong with this. I'm not, we have to all be housed, but it's the absolute, just no bushes, no, but this, one of the first things we did, who was I just talking to? One of the first things we did when we moved to Hayward was take a family trip to this place. What's it called? It's on the East Coast. They do not know what this is. Everybody knows what this is. Does anybody not? Okay, somebody tell this person, that person what this is. Who wants to stand up? This is a way to get you guys awake. The widow of the Winchester rifles, the guns, was told by a medium, this is way back in 18-something, that she had to keep building onto her farmhouse or she would be haunted by the ghosts of all the people killed by Winchester rifles. And interestingly, there's been a lot of rethinking of mediums of late, ever since Hilma af Klint had her show, The Guggenheim, where we're no longer kind of thinking of mediums as people who, just make up ghosts, but giving women voices, because they were often the leaders of the seances. So we can talk about that later. But this is a mansion that has, 1,000 rooms, 870 passageways to nowhere, doors that open onto nothing. And for a little girl with, wanting to feed her imagination, this was powerful. And then years later, I made this painting with its many little rooms, and only thought afterwards that that it had some kind of paying homage to the Winchester Mystery House. But now I'm showing you this one at this point because this is the first version of that painting in the show that has the gold temple. And I was telling some of the classes before that this, I will show you the other versions later. What happened is, you see how tall she is? The woman over there making, well, I got the painting back, and I decided she was a little too big. So I just wanted to make her smaller. And in making her smaller, the whole painting changed. So we'll talk about that later, because that's part of this process of either being God or sabotaging yourself. I don't know which. But speaking of God, so the only art in our home was a painting like this of this guy. We all know who he is. And again, as a little girl, he looked very different from, that guy, right? And that's what all the men in my life looked like, that Ozzy or father or whoever he was. And I loved his deep solemnity and his sort of androgyny. And when you would open the medicine chest in my parents' bathroom, you would find holy cards like this right next to the Band-Aids and the mercurochrome that would take you into these little wormholes of surreality. Here's St. Lucy with her eyes, or St. Agnes with her eyes. Agnes, I think she sacrificed her eyes. Lucy sacrificed her breasts. They all were carrying something that they sacrificed for their love of God on these trays. And they were, again, they didn't look like the people I knew. They looked passionate and dark and solemn and serious. And that's, I think I was a deep fantasy little girl. So I loved their seriousness, but this was the kind of art that was going on at the point that I went to college at UC Santa Cruz. Well, first I went to Monterey Peninsula Junior College because I didn't know better and took a figure drawing class, and it changed my life. But then I went to UC Santa Cruz, and this was the kind of work, and it, had nothing to do with the deep power of that, right? I mean, come on, you've got to choose. Yeah?
Have you ever tried painting other very famous female patron saints or?
Well, you will see, young man. You will see. The answer is yes. And this Pierre Manzoni, canning his Merde in the name of conceptual art. I love conceptual art. All good art is conceptual, but this, again, it didn't have the power of those saint paintings. So years later, 1999, I painted this painting. I'll show you some of the things in between later. It's called Self-Portrait as Infanta Maria Theresa, Dreaming Madame de Sade. Big painting, 6 foot. You can see she's holding these snarling lemurs, like her attributes, like her eyeballs or her breasts, like St. Agnes. Overhead are these thought bubbles that I'll talk about them in a second. I named it Self-Portrait as Infanta Maria Theresa, Dreaming Madame de Sade, because it had that layering, the layered stories that I'm so attracted to. So Infanta Maria Theresa, right here, painted by Velázquez. It was the first powerful painting I saw when I got all my babysitting money together and got myself to Spain, to the Prado, to see this. That changed my life. But I was especially moved by this crazy wig that it's like wearing a headache on your head, or or tumors or something marvelous, however you want to think of it, mirrored in an incredible skirt. Just, she becomes, it's like bringing the inside out via her wig and her dress, and I loved that interiority. Married to this guy, the Louis the Sun King, she was a modest religious woman, and he's this guy, So, you can imagine, how crazy that was. And then Dreaming Madame de Sade, Marquis de Sade, was one of the framers of the French Revolution, and also the writer of these, porn, the first porn novels, French porn novels, that were revolutionary in their relationship to sexuality. But again, the Madame de Sade was another modest religious woman. So I was just fascinated by the codependency, how this would work, and made this painting. But, so, you know, there's all this intellectual stuff that you just heard. And, you know, that was the case. But then I was on my way years later, maybe 7 years later, on a train up to someplace where I was going to do another lecture like this, and thinking about what I was going to say, and suddenly, and thinking about this painting, and suddenly having this memory when we first moved to California and going to a picnic in Golden Gate Park. And it was during this time. And again, I was a little girl from the Midwest. And there's these crazy people dancing and, you know, ecstaticizing. And there was our little wicker picnic basket where all our Midwestern bologna sandwiches, etc., were. And out of the trees, out of the cypresses wreathed in fog, as you can imagine, came this hippie, this long-haired guy, I should say, because I didn't know the word hippie, wearing only a cape and a jockstrap and sort of dancing. And I, little girl that I was riveted. The next thing you know, my mother had sort of shoved the picnic basket, you know, towards me or something, you know, threw it at me or something, and you know, trying to get me not to look. And it was, and the hippie looked like this guy, just to get the story going. And my mother threw the picnic basket at me. And there it was, you know, riveted onto my imagination, this memory from long ago that made its way as succinctly into this painting as any of that Madame de Sade did. The reason I'm telling you is obvious that there's a lot of places that our work comes from. We gather all of the tendrils of a life into our work, and you know, that's where it comes from. So that was a realization, though. I had totally forgotten that, or, you know, shoved it into the back of my mind. Did I just turn myself off? No, I hope I didn't. Okay, so now I'm going to go back in time from 1999. After grad school, I went to Yale. How I got in was a fluke, but it changed my life. I did. Did I turn myself off? No. Did I do something? Okay, I think it's all right. What's going on? Uh-oh. So, is there something I need to know, oh great tech gurus? Okay, it's there, it's staying? Okay, I'm gonna be careful with my hands. All right, after graduate school, I got a Fulbright to Berlin, which was West Berlin at the time. Everybody knows the difference between West Berlin and Berlin? All you people, you know, under 25? Okay, so, you know, Germany was divided after the war between the Allies, and Berlin was a little island of democracy, West Berlin, in the midst of East Germany, right? And the wall went up almost overnight and cut off family from family. And it was a really, really interesting place. So this is in the mid-'80s, and figuration had just kind of come back from pop and minimalism and all those other isms. And I had always been a dedicated figurative artist, but, you know, never feeling like I had my place. But in Germany I did, because Germany has a long history of really powerful figuration, and especially in Berlin, in West Berlin, because on the capitalist Western democratic side, there was what am I doing here? There was what you see here on the left, Ray Smith, the kind of critical figurative work that critiques, using expressionism, kind of critiques the you know, the horrors of war and the things we've perpetrated in the name of you know, progress and civilization. Whereas over in the East, you have socialist realism. I just realized we should turn out the lights. Yeah. Do I know how to do that? Yeah. Thank you. It might. Not those lights. I didn't do that this time, I don't think. Okay, well, I'll keep talking while you work on that. But Socialist Realism over there on the right, and I think it's this, but I see all of them are down.
It all stays like that.
You can take care of it.
Okay, great. Okay. So you have to understand, so how many of you are figurative painters? Okay, so there's enough of you for me to say this really quickly. How we approach the figure will either glorify human beings or critique human beings. We have done things that deserve glorifying, and we have done things that deserve incredible critique, right? East Germany was on this path to a utopia, to a modern utopia with socialism. There was a chance that the worker might actually achieve their equality, and we would get rid of a classist state. And so they had every reason to use methodologies, techniques that glorify, as you see in Socialist Realism. Whereas we in the West knew what we had perpetrated in this world war, and it did not deserve any glorification. So we had two kinds of figuration that were very powerful. And I was doing my version of Western critique. And I don't really know why that's happening, but I try not to touch anything. So I was doing these big paintings that were about foolish human beings. I don't know what I'm... Can anybody help with this? It's back, okay.
I think they're trying to fix it in the booth.
Okay, great. So these are big paintings, and they're all, again, social criticism, ironic, how foolish people are, right? And I was doing a lot of these, painting in this tiny little garret with my boyfriend who was writing a book on Samuel Beckett, shoved into the corner because, you know, our rent was $99, and you know what you get for $99. But what I was, when I would travel around Europe looking at art, the kind of art that I loved was something very different. These kind of modest, understated statements about ripeness that's too much, and you know, this rose too ripe falling out of the vase, or this unswept floor of Tussauds, where you know it's a mosaic about just floor droppings from a meal. And that was so different from this kind of thing. Again, these are big, these are 8 foot, really angry. And I was talking earlier about where you make art from. Do you make it from a place of constructiveness or from destructiveness? And I was doing the latter, which is fine. Expressionism comes from that, but that's not who I am. This is really odd. Is everybody okay?
Yeah.
You're enjoying the flickering? Okay. At the same time, what was happening when I was making all those paintings, and again, there were a lot of them, I was painting 16 hours a day sometimes, and you know, coming from undergrad and grad school, that was accumulating a lot of making in my being, in my head. And there was a point where I remember almost the day where I finished up many hours of painting, and I kind of passed out on the couch and closed my eyes, drifted, and suddenly, I wasn't asleep, but suddenly pictures started to flood into my brain. You know, again, unbidden and not dreams or daydreams or memories. Just pictures from someplace else. It was like stills from somebody else's movie going through my head, and they were really interesting. And you know, and I watched, and you know, it was on the way to sleep, fell asleep, and then woke up and started painting, and the process continued. I had gained access to what is called image streaming, not dreaming, streaming, and it's related to theta wave activity. And I'm sure, you know, most of you do it, but I had never done it before. So it really changed my life, because I had enough clarity and consciousness to watch those stills and think about, you know, they were all not all, but many of them were very, very intriguing. So what happened after that is I felt a profound critical need to change my work, meaning essentially throw out all the bodies of work I'd made. And my cue to you, all you artists out there, is, coming from this point where I am now, I really think it's essential that we throw out whole bodies of work on our way to maturity. I really do. Because of how we change, just to allow sensibilities to flow free. So I changed my work, and I wanted to figure out a way to use these image streaming. I wanted to say that the one on the right was, I didn't stop painting. I would make paintings and then I would throw paint thinner at them to dissolve them, to kind of literalize the process of dissolving my past. And then slowly started to introduce these very lowly subjects, like the still life, as almost like each of those golden persimmons was a forehead on which was projected one of those image streaming moments. Just a very simple idea. It was humbling to head there, because I knew that still lifes are what you do in beginning painting. You don't take them seriously, but they worked for this thing I wanted to do, and I made them big. I made them 6 or 7 feet, and I started to call them self-portrait as fallen angel, and was thinking of them as literally a mirror held up to a psyche, and that being a more apt self-portrait than what this external self is. So it kind of so it set me off. I made a lot of these self-portrait as disaster area. Each of the little thought bubbles would, as I would paint them, they would give rise to another one that would kind of come up in my head, or I would look at film stills and kind of riff on them, change them around, and painting became this arena for very vivid associative thinking. At the same time, I had my first baby, who's now 27, and he's a rock star. He's really good. Bellows is the name of his band. He's beautiful. And he would ask for a story every night. So I would tell him a story, and I'm like not literary, or invented that way, but I would, once upon a time, and then I would go into the image streaming thing, or just that same place, and I would weave out this story, and it was like activating a muscle of imagination. So I urge you all to tell stories to your dog or whoever will be non-judgmental, because it helps, build your imagination. And you see themes coming up, that would work their way into the work. Anyway, so at the same time, this wonderful book by Norman Bryson, Looking at the Overlooked, The History of Still Life, came into my life. It's a beautiful book. And because all the time I've been thinking still lifes are so dumb. Oy, what am I doing? But this book talked about how rich this history is, whether it be Juan Sanchez de Cotin on the right, where he's tracing a parabolic equation about the infinity of space, or the Peter Erikson on the left, where if you look closely, the big images in front, like the apples, it's called the butcher stall. The big images in front are just a host for the little thought bubble. You can see behind, I don't think I have a laser pointer, but there's a little thought bubble behind Mary giving alms to the beggar. So it's that same idea of a thought bubble in the middle of a still life that was done in 15-something. And I thought, I'm part of this conversation with Peter Erikson. And with that, gone was this paradigm that I'd been holding of art making being the rising up of geniuses, and replaced that with, who change everything. I replaced that with art being a long conversation over time, and some of the geniuses like Picasso were definitely in a long conversation with Japanese painting, with African masks, as you all know. And, the genius thing was written by others, not artists. So, Self-Portrait Gourmand, there's just a couple more. The tables became more full of stuff. The thought bubbles became, relevant to maybe things that were going on in my life. This was, remembering Germany and its huge stalls of sausages and heads of cabs and all that. And interspersed with the still lives are little drawn images that continue this kind of language of riffing. Okay, so this is, I think, one of the last ones. I was pregnant, actually this was with my first child. I was pregnant, very pregnant, and making this in that same spirit of this still life is just an excuse for the thought bubble, when I stood back and saw the painting with the new eyes, that all those dark recesses and sprouting cabbages and golden persimmons were kind of like this experience of things ripening in the dark space of my belly. And it was sort of like a little epiphany. So I finished this piece with a text that says, "I opened up my legs and the boy fell out of me." And I called it birth painting, and it taught me that there was nothing arbitrary about what I'd been doing. So that, then another life thing happened. I have two boys, but one is Oliver and one is Sam. And Oliver is the musician, and Sam is going off to Ann Arbor right now to start graduate school. But before Sam was born, I was having abdominal pain, and I thought I was miscarrying, and one thing led to another, and I walked myself to Methodist Hospital, which is down the street from me in Brooklyn. And it turned out to be an ectopic pregnancy, which, for those of you who don't know, it's a pregnancy in the fallopian tube, and if it ruptures, you can die, like an appendix. But nobody had told me about that. Even the female gynecologist I went to, sort of as an example of the kinds of things that doctors are willing to talk about and they're not willing to talk about, which, we have to change. What it gave me is this visual relationship to my body with this large bandage on it, on my female nude body. And remember, I had started my art career, if you will, in that first figure drawing class way back at Monterey Peninsula Junior College, where I had the first experience of female nude and how glorious the human body is. But all through minimalism and conceptual art and the whole avant-garde, the whole modernist movement had pretty much rejected the figure. We'd had too much of it. We were tired of it. It was also, in terms of critical theory, the female nude was the object of the male gaze. Laura Mulvey had spoken so eloquently about women positioning themselves for the pleasure of men, and we just had to stop doing it. It was just something we had to stop doing, just to figure out what she's for. So I had, all through those still lives, also rejected the female nude for those reasons. They were real reasons. But then when this happened to me, it was my own body became a subject matter for me, where it's no longer about titillation or male pleasure, scopophilia, but it was about this is lived experience. This is somebody for whom life went awry, and it could have resulted in catastrophe. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is kind of about nature going awry. So I called it Self-Portrait as Infanta Maria Theresa playing Coriolanus, about scars that you can show and scars that you can't. Isn't that crazy? It's really interesting what's going on. And that ushered in, so now I had, but then I was able to go on and have Sam, and with the one fallopian tube. And now I have two little creatures in my life, who, again, they change your orientation to space and to the human body, because they're little. So I'm just going to show you a few of these. But in between, another book came out. This is by Dave Hickey, Invisible Dragon, 4 Essays on Beauty, where he reintroduced the word beauty into the conversation. talking, because all through Expressionism and the other movements, beauty had been kind of written out. And yet I knew what I was attracted to, and I wanted to use the rhetoric of beauty to bring people, into the paintings. But he also talks about two different kinds of space. One is Caravaggio. It seems like when I touched something long ago, something went awry. The Caravaggio is an example of masculine space that pokes out at you, and the Tiepolo is an example of feminine space that invites you in. And so I was very intrigued by that, and the idea that my feminism could have a counterpart in the kind of space I was making. So I was doing paintings like this that were really inviting you into deep, deep space, and that were then spiraling you from the holes in deep space out to from background to middle ground to foreground, in this sort of abstraction of spiraling, and that is interesting. Do you think it's just going to keep doing that? Okay, great. Okay, so here's a couple of those spiraling ones. I guess we never got the lights out either, did we? Okay. This is Arms and the Man. Again, there's this big sort of nature going awry, and then through the oculus is this whole octopus spaceman war going on. The Gulf War was happening then. Here's another one. Women lolling about in this spiral of these fecund trees. Another one with the roses and the kind of wallpaper, and then inside is that little kind of thought bubble at the bottom is a whole sort of orgy of destruction going on. The war was happening. I was playing the two together. Here's the close-up. One more of these. Again, you can see the birds coming out, attracted to the hoop, flying through it. They become little birds, and they coalesce into a little falling Icarus figure. Which brings me to an idea about narrative that became really important at this point for me to make sense of what a narrative was in the stilled moment of a painting. A painting doesn't move through time, it's a stilled moment, so how can a narrative happen unless it's like St. Jerome, where you see him in different times of his life, which I wasn't interested in. But I knew I was interested in telling a story. So I thought about it and read a lot, and came across an essay by Frank Kermode called Secrets and Narrativity, where he talks about key words that arise in a story that take you to a deeper level of reading, of meaning. And he calls those key words secrets. And at that time, so I felt like, he's onto something, and I was looking at a lot of images and found myself looking at this painting, and had always been really intrigued by a sort of a central tiny moment that essentially functions as a secret to this painting. So this is Vermeer's Woman Holding a Balance. And there she is. You can see the balance in her fingers. She's got her jewelry that she's, the balance is equal. Art historians say about this painting that it's Vermeer musing on where do we get satisfaction in life, from the divine or from worldly wealth. And art historians say because the balance is equal, the trays are equal, that Vermeer is tabling the question. That's what they say. But if you, as a visual person, well, they're visual people too, but if you look closely, you will see so there you have, there's a lot of triangles in this painting. You can see a central triangle pointing down from the top two corners, the light side and the dark side, the point ending at her fingers, and then, you know, a triangle going up, and then triangles throughout. Iconographically, a triangle pointing down refers to the earth, and a triangle pointing up refers to the divine. So what you have essentially in the very middle of the painting, if you look, is her little, okay, just look, the middle of the painting, that wasn't me, that was the middle of the painting. You can see her fingers, her baby finger and her ring finger, the ring finger is turning, is creating a shape. And that shape, you can see, is an upward pointing triangle, right? And that's essentially Vermeer smack in the middle of the painting saying, satisfaction is found from the divine. And only a maker who knows that every little dot of light is important in a painting would know that that's what that means. And I would call that the secret of the painting. And I've talked to a number of art historians who, when I laid this out, like, what do you think about this? They were all like, yeah. But that's not how we're taught to look unless you actually make it yourself. So here's another one. So I was really intrigued at this point about where's the secret? And I'm not saying there's one secret and it's only one and it's mine. We all find the secrets that we need. I'm finding the secrets that I need. Rembrandt, Sacrifice of Isaac. You know that it's a secret when you get that kind of, you know, feeling in your belly, you know, like realization. So there's Sacrifice of Isaac, Abraham, you know, lets loose the knife. It's incredible movement of the knife towards the throat, you know, like I'm gonna, you know, get that kid. But it was when my eye lit upon the open hand with the red cloud that it was like the blood not spilt, you know, hovering in the cloud, that I felt that intake. And then this crazy painting. So you got to just hear me out here, because this is I think one of the most interesting paintings in art history. Are there any art historians here? Oh, you're here. Here you are. Is that you? The one I was talking to? Okay. All right, so I'm going to hope that I can convince you. So, but this actually wasn't my idea. This was Eric Fischel's. So this is a painting by Bonnard, Large Yellow Nude. I had seen it at MoMA years ago, and the weird thing about this painting is there's almost no paint on it. It's just scribbly, but except for, do I have a, no, this is not. Okay, so on that thing down below is some clumps of brown, thick brown on that thing. So you all know the story of Bonnard. He was married to a woman. They were both super introverts. They escaped the Parisian art world because they couldn't deal with you know, any people. She got an illness that left her in the bathtub all the time, so she even escaped from him, and yet he painted her all the time, so she's the most painted woman probably in history. And so here's a man, so this is, you know, like I'm getting into like, what was it like to be married to her for Bonnard? So here's a man, he comes upon, oh, by the way, and art historians, from what I gather, say that this is a woman, you know, doing her toilette, and in the front is, or in the midground, is a chair with a towel thrown over it. So fine, and there she is, you know, you see everything. But then when you look closer, and I had never seen this until Eric Fischel pointed it out, you see that right down here are these things that look like hands with knuckles. You can kind of see the knuckles, the thumb and knuckles. So suddenly you got these scribbly hands, and they need to be scribbly because he can't be clear about this. And so suddenly that thing which was a mid-ground chair becomes a foreground hand holding something. What is he holding? You know, is it a really messy newspaper? Or, you know, none of that makes sense. But when you think about it in terms of these clots of brown, suddenly you see it as a man who has snuck up on his wife finishing her toilette. He sees something on the ground that's very intimate to her, and he picks it up and he looks at it. And what might it be? Well, it might be, according to Eric Fischel, her minstrel rag, which, you know, is a painting. He's made into a painting, which, if you think about the history of art, there's never been the painting of a minstrel rag, except from somebody as quiet and as unassuming as Bonnard. So that is, to me, the biggest secret in art history. I don't know. I don't know what you think. What do you think? Convinced? Oh, good. Thank you. So, but it doesn't matter if it's true or not, because it's true for me, and that makes it this wild painting that raises the ante on what you can paint about. You paint about a minstrel rag. I'm going to paint about something like that. So, so back to me. So here I am with these little figures, and I want them to be intimate and hard-hitting, and I want them to sprout. I want them to sprout from their heads and sprout from their bodies. So I'm going to kind of fly through these. She's sprouting little phallic symbols and forest fires in her head, and the bed itself becomes a kind of sprouting of forests and the like, and out of its turbulent sheets and all. So I want these to be metaphors for interiority. So again, the sprouting head, sprouting the berries. Sprouting chandeliers, sprouting bellies. This was, I was a young mother and teaching full time and being a wife and loving these kids and telling them stories every night, and everything was kind of topsy-turvy and bright with activity, and so were the paintings. And but then time goes by. I made a lot of these. I'm not showing you many of them at all, but things start to deaden and die as they do with age, and so the dead animals start to creep in, but her head is still kind of sprouting the flowers. So the skirt becomes sort of a metaphor not only of her inner state, but of also women as kind of the bearers of culture, and culture with all of its mishaps and mayhem, and death and destruction. So here's a few more of those. They become these kind of twisting structures. The figure herself is sort of almost unimportant to the things she's wearing and holding. What's behind her becomes very important in this thought bubble idea of kind of the Greek chorus speaking to the foolishness of human culture and what we perpetrate in the name of culture. Behind her, when you look closely, again, I want this idea of it's one kind of image from far away, and when you come up close, a whole other world of critique and satire sets in. A few more. I decided to do a reclining nude and have different parts of her kind of thinking. Some things, thinking out of her groin and thinking out of her feet and thinking out of her head, as things conflate with each other. Again, the war is going on, and I move between using the figure and using things that stand in as the figure, and so here's a little kind of figurative skirt with an exploding head. This was the bombing of Baghdad. Here's a detail. Here's another one. Things are, again, awry. Behind her is sort of a gallery of my work, and this ceiling mural that's starting to kind of ooze out of its frame. Here's another one. I was interested in the idea of aristocratic interiors where all these machinations of war are wrought, falling apart, exploding. Yes.
I don't want to interrupt you. You can finish your thought.
You sure?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Here's a detail of that. Here it is again. The chandeliers themselves hold all of these sort of hidden images. when you look closely. There's a detail. There's an amputation going on over in the one on the right. Exploding head of the baby, of the little kid. Within the exploding head, the sprouting becomes, again, a way of imagination with all of this activity going on within the flowers. Again, sprouting head with the Greek chorus behind, and now she's wearing a kind of tapestry of cut earth with cultural events, cultural edifices tumbling as metaphorically is happening now. And then the head becomes the earth itself. And I started a series where it was just these spheres, and they were okay, but they weren't quite working, so I cut a hole in them and saw within that hole all these rooms inside the hole. And but that wasn't quite right either. It was like, how do you get to those rooms? So I built the wall, and then I built the roller coaster full of all these pitfalls and impediments. And at that point, with the little ladder down there, I felt like, so that's what it's about. It's not really about necessarily what's in the brain, but how you get there became interesting. Advent calendars from my past kind of came into the picture, loving all those little rooms. Here's another one with all these little rooms. I paint them with this kind of, Freudian sort of put a few dabs of color, and what do they suggest? And that suggestion becomes an actuality, and as I'm painting that actuality, it associates to another possibility that becomes an actuality. So there are all these relationships between the rooms, even though they're separate. And again, like those stories I was telling my kids, they become mechanisms for just imagining. So here's detail. And it's like mental work, and I think I'm exhausted. Anyway, a few more. My son's going off to college. I wanted to give him a tool belt of things he might need to bring with him, with books and keys and ropes. And I wanted to give him a backpack full of endangered animals that's his to take care of, with images of wisdom. These are the, I was talking about in one of the talks, these are the great paintings that actually foster wisdom. Here is, again, this is a print where I was actually able to put reproductions of those actual paintings of images of wisdom in the doorways of the backpack. And some of those images, which I won't talk about here because I'm going to put you to sleep and I'm running out of time, Fra El Greco, Fra Paravicino, if you take that apart formally, it will become a kind of a play of binaries uniting, with black and white, up and down, heaven, hell, male, female. If you look at the incredible kind of groin, female groin, written into the robe of his pants, and the weird fallopian tube shape of his hands in relation to that funnel of a robe. I mean, that's profound. This is a monk that embodies the joining of the binaries, which is what my kids are all about. Mary Magdalene, a meditation on suffering and how suffering disintegrates us. The way that the head is cut off from the arm, the breast. They're all cut off from each other through the flames of her hair that really embodies suffering. There's a lot of those throughout there. So here's a painting right after the 2008 financial collapse, where I was just so mad at Wall Street and so mad at, basically greed causing, the world financial market to collapse, and was thinking, what do we need with hedge fund guys? They probably collect my paintings, but we don't need them. So I was imagining the world that we might need. And again, I make these paintings to last forever, so that if you, so you can look at it for a long time and find a lot of things. So, in this quick slide talk, I can't barely begin, but there's little mounds of moments of, what we need. We need the lovers and the inventors and the builders and the barriers. And the dreamers, here's a dreamer in front of the Rubens, Daughters of Leucippus, and all about our little copies of these great paintings that I think foster wisdom. Here's my son off to into the world in the sort of thrall of nature, embodied in this nature culture, embodied in this ball of temples and houses of cards, and the fragile and the heroic. Here's my son. I gave him a pregnant belly. Here he is up in a tree, and it's his job to water the turkey ball. There's all these turkey heads in that ball, by pulling on the ropes that will pull on the branches that will cause the ship to spill its water onto the turkey ball and water it. Because it's your job to water, and it's my job. It's all our job. Okay, world's falling apart, world's fragile, people moving out. We got to move out of our consuming ways. Here they are on this fragile little bridge with all of their possessions. Here's another one. This is up at the Crocker in Sacramento. Moving out, changing, chutes and ladders up and down, all around. Detail gone. Falling sky. I'm going to fly through these. I don't even know what time it is, but I'm going to talk fast. Retired idols, what we have to move out and what we should move in. A world, what if we had sculpture all over the place? What if we had art all over the place? Good art. Imagining a world full of shapes that stimulate. And now we're getting close to really close to now. This is the self-portrait as thief. We have in the show self-portrait as other thief. This is the first one, a kind of Burning Man idea of burning up the old idols. And what do we save as the sky is falling? What is worth saving? Catastrophic failure. This is after Hurricane Sandy. That's down below at her feet is the bridge that was flooded out from the Rockaways, and so she's caught between the freezing and the fiery, with her little feckless hose. Shelter. At this point thinking about what I would save, how I would create a shelter full of things that are meaningful to me, while behind her is a kind of a black mirror, a dystopic world that is reflecting our space, the space of the viewer, as in a kind of dystopia, very slow-moving dystopia. I did a tree. I won't go into it. This is a little, there were little videos inside of knotholes that would take you on this kind of endoscopic ride inside the tree, because I think trees should be worshipped. I do. Okay, here we got the painting in the show there, Other Thief. Details, you've seen it. You've seen this one. Love the new format. Isn't that nice? If any of you saw the show, you can see that it's much wider. Mayday, Requiem, Great Acceleration, Sky Burial, and then now these are the last few from the last show. Feast of Fools. Our president was elected. I was upset. Kind of in the spirit of Bruegel and blind leading the blind. There's a sort of a bunch of fools and madmen escaping down and up and around, and the head fool is me in the front. This is Hothead, which will be in a show at Catherine Clark Gallery in San Francisco probably in February, I believe. It's redone. You'll see there's images from Goya's Disasters of War, kind of coming out of the tree, coming out of her head. And this brings us to where we started. Self-portrait was Shipwreck. Again, the only thing I changed from that very first image is I wanted her head to be bigger, in the spirit of what you've seen so far. kind of giving credence to the idea that our heads are on fire, especially at this time. And there she is again, holding these scrolls that are the accumulation of powerful images and disrupting images and distorting images. And behind her again are these great women, from Jane Campion and Anita Hill to Tamara Burke, the Me Too movement person, Simone de Beauvoir, Germaine Greer, Gloria Steinem, all these great women. Here's another one, Shipwreck, and again the scrolls. And we started with this one. Here's a detail. I'll just really briefly. So on that top scroll is Napoleon's David. I think it was a Guido Reni, Hercules. Washington crossing the Delaware, all examples of using pompier, French academic painting, to aggrandize subjects for propaganda purposes. That essentially, you go into some of those museums and you think, why is this off-putting? And you realize that it's basically you're getting lied to about this puny guy who's a bully, who's they have to make into a great hero. And I wanted to speak to that. So then on the flip side of it are pictures of, the violence of actual war and violence of actual subjugating of people and the like. So it's my way of kind of speaking back through my work. Just a couple more. I don't Spill, self-portrait of Spill. There's a big spill at the bottom. Some of the examples of paintings that I have repurposed for my own work. So there's a who was it? I think it's not a Rubens. Anyway, right behind her head is Bacchus raping or about to rape. What's that? Is it? Anyway, one of those Greek myths where a woman is getting preyed upon. I'm running out of words. That I wanted to stick her. I put her head right in front of the woman's groin to kind of protect her from this peeping tom of a little god, and kind of rewrite the sort of art history that subjugates women and thinks it's fine. We had a whole conversation with some of you about the George Washington High School mural controversy, which we can talk about later. But what do we want to look at? Do we want to look at pictures of women being raped all the time? Do we want to look at no? So I'm going to change it in my own world, and I think this might be the last one. And there's another Anita Hill and another rape scene that I've cut off the Bacchus and kind of freed her to just run. And I think that's it. That is. Okay. So, thank you for listening.